Hello, Econ students. Today we're doing notes 4.4 on gross domestic product, or GDP. Your essential question: what is GDP and how do we measure growth? So first we're going to be looking at GDP. What is GDP? How is it calculated and what influences it? So GDP, gross domestic product, is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders in any given year. So GDP does not include the value of intermediate goods, which are goods that are used in the production of a final good and service. So, like in the factories that were producing these goods, anything that goes into making the good is not counted in GDP, just the final product. So consumer goods, like durable goods, goods that last for a pretty long time, like refrigerators or cars, and non durable goods are goods that last for a short period of time. So, like food, um, light bulbs potentially could last, like, it depends on what kind of light bulb you're getting. But so we have durable and non durable goods. And we can calculate GDP in two different ways. So we can calculate GDP with the expenditure approach or the income approach. The expenditure approach totals all the annual expenditures for the four categories of final goods and services. So it just adds up consumer goods, business goods, government goods, and net exports or imports of any goods or services. The income approach, on the other hand, calculates GDP by adding up all the incomes in the economy, so all the money people are making in the economy. Okay, so pretty much we're adding up all of these different things. So the exports, investments, government spending, consumption, we add all those things together and that equals our GDP. So nominal GDP is GDP that's measured in current prices. It does not account for the price level increase from year to year, and real GDP is expressed in constant or unchanging dollars. The limitations of GDP: GDP doesn't take account all economic activities that happen in the United States. So it doesn't calculate things that are non-market activities. So things that are obviously still costing us time that we could be doing something else, such as caring for children or cooking dinner, taking care of our houses, things like that. It also does not calculate negative externalities. So if you remember way back to Unit 1, externalities, remember, are economic side effects. So it doesn't calculate things like pollution or climate change that some of our factories and some of our corporations are putting into the environment. GDP does not calculate the underground economy, so anything that's happening on the black market or under the table. So if you're working for someone and they're paying you in cash, those sort of things are not counted as part of the total GDP. The gross national product is the GNP. This is the market value of all the goods and services produced by Americans in one year. So the GDP is the gross domestic product, gross national product, GNP. And the net national product, the NNP, is the depreciation, so the loss of the value of the capital equipment that results from normal wear and tear from all of the things we're producing year to year. So if we're thinking about, like, let's say Teslas, we make Teslas here in California, right? So if we're producing Teslas that are produced each year are going to be calculated as part of the GDP, but the normal wear and tear on all the machineries to create that is considered part of the net national product. So the depreciation. The national income is the NNP minus all the sales and excise taxes. And then your personal income, so personal as in you personally, that is your total pre-tax income paid to US households. So if your income before taxes is considered your personal income. Your disposable personal income is the income that you have minus your taxes. So all the money that you made that you actually took home in your paycheck. So factors that can influence GDP, we have, of course, supply, demand, and equilibrium. So aggregate supply is the total amount of goods and services in the economy available at all possible price levels. So as price levels rise, the supply rises because that's a law of the supply. And as the aggregate demand goes, the amount of goods and services that will be purchased at all possible price levels. But the lower price levels will increase that demand. So remember the law of demand: when prices go down, demand goes up. And then the aggregate supply and aggregate demand equilibrium is when we combine these two. So when we combine these two curves, the equilibrium for the macroeconomy can be determined. All right, next we're moving into business cycles. So, business cycle is a macroeconomic period of expansion followed by a period of contraction. So, we always go through periods of business cycles in the United States looking at our economy. We will always have expansion, we'll have booms, and then we'll go into recessions and depressions. That's how the system always works. And generally, it works on about a 6-year period. So these are the four phases of the business cycle. So we have the expansion period. That's where we have the growth as measured by a rise in GDP. And then we have a peak. That is the highest point of the growth. That is when the GDP stops rising. The economy is at the peak. And then we start to have a contraction. So after we have that peak, the economy starts to decline. We start to have a fall in real GDP. If that is expanded, if it's a longer period of contraction, it's considered to be a recession if it's prolonged. So, like we had in 2008, when we had the housing market kind of go under, we had a recession. So, we were struggling in the United States for a while. If it's especially long, it can be considered a severe recession or called a depression. So, like what we had in 1929 when the stock market crashed, in the 1930s, we had the Great Depression. And then the trough is the lowest point of the economic decline when the GDP stops falling. And that is the end of the business cycle when it will go back up into the expansion period. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like. Pretty much always happens in this same cycle. Business cycles are affected by four main economic variables. Business investment. So, obviously, if you're investing in a business, if a business is expanding, then we can expect it to increase. Interest rates and credit will have an impact. When interest rates are low, companies can make new investments, but then when the interest rates climb, they can't invest quite as much money. Consumer expectations, forecasts of expanding economy, fuel more spending. So if people are feeling good, they think the economy is doing good, they're going to spend more. But if they're in fear that they're going to have a recession or things are going to go bad, they're going to not spend as much money so that they can save their money and have it in case of an emergency later. And then external shocks, so these are kind of like big events that happen, can also affect the business cycle. So this is like natural disasters or like a global pandemic like we're going through right now, right? The economy was doing really well this year until COVID hit. And then once COVID hit, people had to shut down businesses, we had to close everything, we had to keep people safe. So definitely economy took a hit because of the external shock of COVID. Economists do try to predict or forecast, they try to assess what is going to happen with business cycles. But they can't always predict the great depressions or recessions that we have in our business cycles because of these strange fluctuations that happen. So in 1929, no one expected the stock market to crash as it did. We didn't know as much about stocks as we do now. We have learned so much from that crash in 1929. We had recessions that happened in the 70s due to oil embargoes that were happening. People were stopping the sale of oil to the United States as a war tactic. And then we had the Great Recession that happened in 2008. So we had the housing bubble burst. So remember, the inflation was causing all of the housing prices to be overmarketed. They were loaning house loans, mortgages out to people who couldn't afford to pay them. And then eventually that bubble popped and people were not able to make their housing payments, their mortgages. So we can't always predict these fluctuations that happen in the business cycle. Right, economic growth. So, in order to account for population increases in an economy, economists use measurements of real GDP per capita. So, that means per person. So, real GDP per capita is considered the best measure of a nation's standard of living. Because if we have an increase in population, we have to account for the new amount of people that we have. So we count that as part of the GDP per capita. The basic measure of a nation's economic growth rate is the percentage of real GDP over a period of time. And economists are trying to have a process called capital deepening. So, the process of capital deepening is increasing the amount of capital per worker. So, they want us to be as efficient as possible. Firms can increase physical capital by purchasing more equipment. They can also increase human capital through additional training, additional education. So, like this summer when COVID hit, well, in the spring when COVID hit, there was a lot of trainings that they push teachers into so that we would be able to be more efficient as teachers teaching online in this new environment. So we spent the whole summer training on new ways to be efficient online educators because most of us have never taught classes online before, as you can probably tell. All right, so the effects of saving and investing on the economy. The portion of disposable income spent to income saved is what we call the savings rate. So when a customer saves or invests their money in a bank, their money becomes available for other people to use. So kind of like we talked about earlier when we were talking about banking, when you put your money in the bank, that's how the bank can loan that money out to other people who want to buy a car or buy a house. It's available for other people to borrow and to use. And the same works for you. So if you want to buy a car, if you want to buy a house, you can go to the bank and you can ask them for a loan and they would give you other people's savings to be able to do that. Now, of course, your savings is still protected in there. Remember, the FDIC insures all of your money up to $100,000. But that's how banks work to loan out money to other people. Besides capital deepening, the other key source of economic growth is technological progress. So, technological progress is an increase in the efficiency gained by producing more output without using more inputs. So we can have innovations, we can have new ideas like we learned about last unit. We had an innovation once with the Blackberries came on the market. Now people didn't have to be sitting at a desk to be able to do their work. They could do their work anywhere. And that, of course, has just increased with iPhones and Androids. Now people can respond at all times of the day or night, anytime you can be contacted. The scale of the market affects technological process and education and experience. So, the more education that we have, the more skills that we have, the better we are to create new technologies and the better suited we are to use new technologies. And then other factors that can affect growth. So, if we have a population growth, that can impact, if we have too many people, that can cause the capital per worker to actually shrink. But if we keep the population growing at a steady rate, then we can keep things positive. The government can affect growth as well. The government can either raise or lower taxes. They can offer stipends. They can offer money to different companies for investments. Like right now, the government is offering money to these companies that are producing the COVID vaccines. The government is trying to affect the growth and trying to speed up the process so that we all can get these vaccines as quickly as possible so we can get out of this COVID crisis. And that's the end of your notes for today. So don't forget to write a summary, a couple sentences about what you learned.